In a galaxy far beyond the stars, war was constant, a never-ending cycle of destruction. The humans, a young and determined species, had fought to protect their way of life, but they had made a powerful enemy. The Zaldrak, an ancient and advanced alien race, had set their sights on humanity. To them, humans were nothing more than a nuisance, a primitive species standing in the way of their imperial ambitions. The Zaldrak were ruthless, their fleet was vast, their weapons powerful, and their warriors were feared across the galaxy. They had conquered worlds, enslaved entire civilizations, and burned cities to the ground without hesitation. In their eyes, humanity was weak, too soft to survive the might of their empire. But they had underestimated the humans. Captain Jarek of the Zaldrak fleet was a man who had never known failure. He had fought countless battles, defeated alien forces, and stood tall as a symbol of his people's strength. However, that all changed when his ship was ambushed in a surprise attack by the humans. Their fleet, led by Admiral Richard Westmore, had come out of nowhere, striking with speed and precision. Jarek's ship was crippled, and he was forced to surrender. Now, Jarek found himself in the hands of the very species he had spent his life conquering. His pride, his honor, everything he had fought for, was gone. The human warship that captured him was unlike any other. It was designed for humane captivity, a vessel built to hold prisoners without unnecessary cruelty. Jarek, however, could not understand why the humans did not treat him as their enemies always had. The humans who guarded him were not like the monsters he had expected. They did not torment him with pain or degradation. They did not mock him, nor did they show the rage he had grown accustomed to when facing prisoners. Instead, they treated him with respect, perhaps even kindness. One woman in particular caught his attention, Lieutenant Eva Daniels. She was the one assigned to watch over him, to ensure he did not escape or turn against them. But she didn't look at him with hatred, the way most humans might. Instead, she looked at him as though he were something else, something more complicated than just an enemy. At first, Jarek hated her for it. He hated the way she would speak to him with that calm, compassionate voice, offering him food, offering him a chance to speak. He hated that she saw him not just as a prisoner, but as something worth understanding. He wanted to be left alone in his pain. He wanted the rage to consume him. But Ava was relentless. She would not let him retreat into himself. She would not allow him to give up. Jarek did not want to be weak. He had always been strong. He had always been in control. But now, trapped within the walls of this human ship, he felt a weakness growing inside of him, a desperation he had never known. His body ached from the battle, his pride shattered by defeat, but it was his mind that truly suffered. He had failed. The Zaldrak Empire was crumbling, and he had played a part in its fall. There, in the quiet of his cell, Jarek's mind began to unravel. He had always been the one to strike fear into his enemies. He had always been the one in control, the one who made others tremble in fear. But now he was nothing. He was a prisoner, helpless and broken. The days blurred together as he was kept in captivity. The humans were kind to him, yes, but kindness meant nothing when it only reminded him of his failure. He begged them, silently, for death. His mind was consumed with the thought that perhaps death would be the only way to end the pain. But no matter how hard he wished for it, the humans refused. Lieutenant Eva would visit him every day, speaking to him in soft tones, asking him questions, trying to get him to open up. But Jarek remained silent, consumed by his hatred for the humans and his own weakness. Yet, despite his silence, he couldn't help but feel something stirring within him. He couldn't deny the small flickers of admiration that came when he saw the humans work together. He saw how they treated each other with respect, how they didn't seek to destroy what they didn't understand. One day, Eva came to him with something different in her hands, a book. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside him and offered it. Jarek looked at the book, then at her, confused. He didn't want to read. He didn't want to engage with her, but for some reason he took the book. She didn't demand anything from him. She simply waited for him to do as he wished. Days passed, and Jarek found himself reading the book, though he didn't know why. It was about human history, about their struggles and triumphs. He read about their wars, their pain, their suffering. But there was something different in the way humans faced it, something that both intrigued and confused him. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for survival, for the chance to protect what they loved. Jarek's anger began to shift. Slowly, he could not deny that humanity's resilience was something he had never seen before. They fought not with cruelty, but with a determination that refused to be broken. They fought not because they were strong, but because they were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of each other. And in that moment, Jarek understood something that shook him to his core. He had never truly known what it meant to fight for something beyond himself. He had fought for conquest, for power, for his people's empire. But now, standing on the edge of losing everything, he realized he had nothing left to fight for. He begged again, this time not for his own sake, but because he couldn't take it anymore. He begged Eva to kill him, to put an end to his suffering. His voice trembled as he spoke, the words foreign and weak, but Eva only looked at him with a quiet, steady gaze. "I can't do that," she said softly. Jarek's heart broke. He wanted death to end the torment. He wanted the darkness to swallow him whole, but she refused. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eva paused, her eyes soft and filled with something Jarek didn't understand. "Because you're worth more than that. You're more than the mistakes you've made. You're not just a weapon, Jarek. You're a person." The words struck him deeply. He had spent his life seeing others as tools to be used and discarded. He had never considered the idea that life could mean more than just survival, that it could mean growth, change, and the chance for redemption. Jarek's world seemed to tilt on its axis. How could someone like him, someone who had brought so much death, ever deserve mercy? How could he ever deserve the chance to live, to grow, when all he had done was destroy? Ava's refusal to kill him only deepened his despair. He had never known a mercy like this. He had never known a kindness that didn't come with strings attached. It was this that left him feeling helpless, more broken than he had ever been in his life. But it was also this that began to shift something inside him. As Jarek lay in his cell, the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, he realized something. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew that somehow everything was about to change. The human mercy was a force unlike any weapon he had ever known, and in the silence of that realization, Jarek began to wonder, could there be a future for him beyond the destruction of his past? Days passed into weeks, and still Jarek remained in the quiet confines of his cell aboard the human warship. The ship was a strange place for him, quiet, orderly, and filled with sounds of machinery and the occasional hum of the crew's voices. To Jarek, it felt alien. The constant chatter of the humans was something he could not understand, not because of language, but because of the way they carried themselves, the way they cared for each other, and even for him, as if he were not simply a prisoner, but something else entirely. At first, he had dismissed the humans' kindness as weakness, but as time went on, he started to see it differently. Lieutenant Eva Daniels, the woman who had been assigned to guard him, never left him alone. She came to his cell every day, bringing food, speaking to him, offering books, and trying to get him to open up. At first, Jarek resisted. His pride would not allow him to admit any weakness, not even to this strange woman who seemed so different from the warriors he had once fought beside. Eva's presence was a reminder of the mercy he had begged for, and yet the more she refused to grant it, the more he began to question his own beliefs. She had told him that he was worth more than death, that there was more to life than simply surviving. It was a thought he couldn't shake. Why would a human, someone he considered so weak, offer him such a gift? How could they see something in him that he couldn't even see in himself? The days blurred together, but something inside Jarek began to change. Each time Eva spoke to him, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps curiosity. He had never been interested in what others had to say before. He had never cared for anything other than victory. But now, with nothing left to fight for, he found himself listening to her words, paying attention to the way she treated him. Like a person, not just an enemy. One day, as Eva sat across from him, she placed a small box on the table between them. Jarek looked at it, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to play a game?" she asked. Jarek stared at her for a long moment. It was strange to him, this idea of leisure. His people had never made time for such things. War was constant. Survival was the goal. Everything had a purpose, even if that purpose was simply destruction. Yet here she was, offering him something so ordinary. He didn't respond at first, but eventually he reached out and opened the box. Inside, there were small pieces, like strange tokens. Ava began explaining the rules of a human game, one that involved strategy and planning, but also patience. Jarek listened, though he didn't fully understand. It was the first time since his capture that he had taken part in something that wasn't tied to his failure or the war. As the days passed, Ava continued to bring new games, new books, and new ways to engage Jarek. At first he resisted, but soon he found himself playing the games with more focus, as if they were more than just distractions. They became a way for him to forget, for a moment, about the war, about the fall of his empire, and about his endless suffering. It was during these moments of quiet that something unexpected happened. Jarek began to change. His anger, once so powerful, began to fade. No longer felt the constant urge to fight, to break free, to destroy. He still didn't understand why the humans treated him the way they did, but he no longer wanted to fight against it. The more he spoke with Ava, the more he realized that her mercy, her refusal to kill him, was not a weakness. It was strength. A strength that came from compassion, from seeing value in someone, even when that person couldn't see it in themselves. One evening, after a long day of quiet conversation and a game of chess, Jarek found himself talking more openly with Eva than he ever had before. The walls inside him, built by years of war and hatred, began to crumble. He spoke of his people, the Zaldrak, and their endless conquests. He told her of their belief in their own superiority, how they had always looked down on other species, including humans. But in the telling of these things, he realized something he hadn't before. The Zaldrak were not invincible. They had been blinded by their own arrogance, believing that their strength made them untouchable. And now, as the empire crumbled, he understood that it wasn't strength that mattered. It was something more. It was the ability to change, to grow, and to learn from mistakes. Ava listened to him quietly, her eyes steady. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to offer solutions. She just listened. It was a small thing, but for Jarek, it was a revelation. He had never had anyone listen to him without judgment before. He had always been the one doing the judging, the one making decisions that affected the lives of countless others. But now, for the first time, someone was simply allowing him to be, without asking for anything in return. In the days that followed, Jarek found himself thinking more about the humans, about Eva, about their resilience. They had fought not for glory, not for power, but for something more. They fought for each other, for survival, for the future. They fought for redemption, even when they didn't deserve it. Jarek's thoughts were torn. He still felt the weight of his past, the heavy burden of the destruction he had caused. But now, there was a glimmer of something else, a small hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what he had always believed. One day, after a particularly long game of chess, Eva sat down beside him, her face serious. "Jarek," she said softly, "why do you fight?" Jarek looked at her, not understanding the question. What do you mean?
Eva smiled gently, her voice calm.
Why did you fight in the war? Why did you destroy so much when you knew it would only lead to pain? Jarek swallowed, his mind racing. He had never truly asked himself that question before. He had fought for his people, for his empire, for the idea that they were superior. But in the end, it had all been meaningless. His people had been destroyed, and he had been left to face the consequences of their actions. I fought because I believed it was the only way, he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. Ava nodded, understanding. That's the way many people think, but sometimes it's not about fighting. Sometimes it's about choosing to change, to move forward, even when the past tries to pull you back.
Jack looked at her, his thoughts a whirlwind.
He had never considered the possibility of change. He had never thought about moving forward, not after all the destruction. But Eva had shown him something new. She had shown him that there was strength in mercy, in forgiveness, and in the willingness to let go of the past. For the first time in a long time, Jarek felt something other than anger. It was a small, fragile feeling, but it was there. He felt the weight of his past still hanging over him, but he also felt the possibility of a future that could be different. A future where he wasn't defined by the mistakes he had made, but by the choices he made from this point forward. Do you think I can change? He asked, his voice soft. Eva smiled, her eyes kind. I think you already are. The days that followed seemed to blur together, and yet Jarek felt as though he was becoming someone else. He had spent years as a soldier, a warrior with a singular focus, to win at all costs. But here, surrounded by the humans and their strange way of life, he was forced to face the harsh reality of his own existence. The war was over. The Zaldrak Empire had crumbled, torn apart by the very forces it had once sought to destroy. Jarek's people, the proud and powerful Zaldrak, were no more. The fleet that had once commanded the stars was now scattered, its remnants lost in the cold void of space. And Jarek was left as the last living reminder of that fallen empire. He had no purpose, no mission, no place to go. All that was left was the silence of the human warship, where he had been kept as a prisoner. He had asked for death many times, and each time, the humans had refused. Lieutenant Eva Daniels, the one person who had shown him kindness in this strange new world, had refused to grant him the mercy he so desperately sought. She had told him that he was worth more than death, that he had the potential for change. But how could he change? How could someone like him, someone who had spent his entire life in the service of destruction, ever hope to find a new path? Jarek didn't know. He still didn't understand the humans, their compassion, their belief in second chances. But there was one thing he had come to realize. The humans were right. He had been given a second chance, and if he didn't take it, he would never forgive himself. Ava had told him that life was about more than survival. It was about what came next, about the choices you made in the face of overwhelming odds. Jarek didn't fully understand it, but he was beginning to see that there was truth in her words. One day, as Jarek sat in his cell trying to make sense of everything that had happened, Ava came to visit him again. She had a small tablet in her hands, and she looked at him with that steady, calm gaze he had come to expect. Jarek, she said softly, I've been given orders. The humans want to offer you a chance. They want to know if you'll help us. Help you? What could I possibly offer? Eva smiled, though it was a sad smile. You are more than just a soldier. You've seen the Zaldrak's way of life. You know what they believe, how they think. You could help us rebuild, help us understand what happened and why it happened. There's more to you than just being a prisoner. You could be an ally. Jarek felt a sharp pang of doubt in his chest. Could he truly become an ally to these people, the ones he had once thought of as weak, Could he help them after everything he had done? The idea of working alongside the humans, of turning his back on everything he had known, was terrifying. But at the same time, it was the only chance he had left, the only way to find some measure of redemption. Eva seemed to sense his hesitation. She sat beside him, her eyes full of understanding.
You don't have to decide right now, she said quietly. But think about it.
You've been given a second chance, Jarek. Don't waste it. The humans believe in redemption. They believe that anyone, no matter their past, can find a way to move forward. Jarek's heart pounded in his chest as he processed her words. A second chance. Was it possible for someone like him to change? Could he really find a way to atone for the years of destruction, the countless lives lost in the wake of the Zaldruk's conquest? He had spent so long hiding behind his anger, behind his pride, that he had never truly considered the possibility of change. But here, in the quiet of his cell, with the humans offering him a lifeline, he couldn't help but wonder if it was possible. For the first time in months, Jarek felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know how he would do it, or if he could do it, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running from his past. He couldn't keep asking for death just to avoid the pain of living. I'll do it, Jarek said, his voice rough.
I'll help.
I'll do whatever I can. Eva's eyes softened and she placed a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Jarek.
You don't know what this means. The decision to help the humans was not an easy one for Jarek.
It meant confronting everything he had been, everything he had done. It meant facing the truth of his actions, the pain he had caused, and the people he had wronged. But it also meant something else. The possibility of a future where he could rebuild, where he could find a way to make amends for his past. The humans didn't ask for much. They didn't demand that Jarek immediately forgive himself or erase his past. They simply asked that he help them understand the Zaldrak, to help them rebuild after the destruction they had wrought. Jarek's knowledge of the Zaldrak's tactics, their strategies, their mindset, would be invaluable. And in return, the humans offered him something he had never received before, a chance to make a difference. As the days passed, Jarek began to feel a sense of purpose that he had never known. He worked alongside the humans, using his knowledge to help them understand the Zaldrak's methods, their battle strategies, and their plans. He helped them decipher the patterns of the Zaldrak fleet, advising them on how to defend against future attacks and prevent the rise of another empire like his own. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Jarek was consumed by doubt, moments when he wondered if he was doing the right thing. But with each passing day, he began to feel a growing sense of peace. For the first time in his life, he was doing something that mattered. He wasn't fighting for conquest or glory. He was fighting for something more important, the chance to rebuild, to create something better than the empire he had known. And through it all, Ava remained by his side, offering him guidance, support, and the occasional word of encouragement. She never asked him to forget his past, but she showed him that his future could be different. One evening, as Jarek sat in the command center of the human warship, studying the Zaldrak fleet's movements on a holographic display, he looked up to see Eva standing in the doorway. She smiled at him, a quiet, knowing smile. "You've come a long way, Jarek," she said, softly. Jarek didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back at the display, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had come a long way, but there was still much more to do. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said finally, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you." Ava's smile grew and she nodded. "You're doing it yourself now, Jarek." "You're the one making the choice, and that's what matters." Jarek had made his choice. He had chosen to live. He had chosen to help, to rebuild, to atone for his past. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be moments of doubt and pain, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the man he once was. He wasn't the warrior who sought only victory. He wasn't the soldier who believed in nothing but conquest. He was something more. And as the humans worked alongside him, he realized that he had been given the greatest gift of all: the chance to change, the chance to make a difference, and the chance to finally live a life that mattered. Jarek had never imagined that this would be his life, working with the humans who had once been his enemies, helping them rebuild what his own people had destroyed. But here he was, standing on the bridge of a human warship, surrounded by soldiers who respected him, who valued him. For the first time in a long time, Jarek felt like he belonged. It had been several months since he made the decision to help the humans, and though the path had not been easy, Jarek found himself slowly beginning to change. At first, his work had been limited to sharing his knowledge of the Zaldrak, their tactics, and their strategies. He had been valuable to the humans in that regard, but it had been more than just his knowledge that they had wanted from him. They wanted him to be part of something greater than himself. They wanted him to help rebuild, not just their fleets or defenses, but also the trust that had been shattered by the war. Ava was still by his side, and she was the one who reminded him of the importance of what he was doing. She had been the first to show him kindness, to believe in him when he had nothing left to offer. Without her, Jarek wasn't sure he would have made it this far. Every conversation with her had been a small step forward, a piece of the puzzle that was slowly helping him rebuild his life. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of his past pressed heavily on him, but Eva always reminded him that it was his choices now that defined him, not the mistakes of the past. One day, as Jarek was studying a new set of Zaldrak battle plans with the human commanders, he overheard a conversation between two of the officers. They were talking about a potential mission to investigate a distress signal that had come from a nearby planet. The distress signal had originated from an old Zaldrak outpost, a place that had been abandoned for years after the Empire's fall. The officers were unsure of what they might find, but there was talk of possible survivors, Zaldrak survivors who had been left behind when the Empire collapsed. Jarek's heart skipped a beat at the thought. Zaldrak survivors? He couldn't imagine what kind of people would be left after the fall of the Empire. The Zaldrak had never been known for their mercy, and those who had been loyal to the Empire's cruel ways might have survived. But at what cost?
What had they become in the years since the collapse? He had to know.
He had to understand. What had become of his people? The idea gnawed at him. It felt like a test, a final test to prove whether or not he could truly leave his past behind. He had spent so many years serving the Zaldrak Empire, and now, after everything that had happened, could he go back to the ruins of his old life? Could he face what remained of his people, knowing what they had done? Jarek didn't say anything right away, but he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The human officers had already made plans to send a team to investigate, and they were looking for someone who knew the Zaldrak better than anyone else. Jarek had the knowledge they needed, but there was more to it than that. He had once been one of them. He had once been part of that empire, a warrior who had believed in its strength and its superiority. Could he go back to that place, knowing that he was no longer the man he had been? It was Eva who finally convinced him to go. She told him that he couldn't run from his past forever, that confronting it was the only way to move forward. "You're not the same person you were," she told him.
You've changed, but that doesn't mean you can forget who you were.
You have to face it, Jarek. And you have to do it for yourself. Her words stuck with him, and when the mission was set in motion, Jarek made the decision to join the team. He would go to the Zaldrak outpost, not to reclaim his old life, but to understand it, to make sure that he could truly move on. The journey to the planet was long, and the closer they got, the more Jarek's mind raced. He wasn't sure what he would find there. Would the Zaldrak survivors be as ruthless as he had once been? Would they still hold to the old ways, the old beliefs? outpost was abandoned, the buildings half collapsed, and the air smelled of dust and decay. But there were signs of life, faint traces of recent activity that suggested someone, or something, was still there. Jarek led the way through the ruins, his heart pounding with every step. He had never thought he would return to a place like this, never thought he would see the remains of the empire he had once served. The halls were silent, the walls scarred by battle, but there was a strange kind of peace in the stillness. It was as though the planet itself had been abandoned by time. They reached the central control room, and there, in the shadows, they found the survivors. But they were not the warriors Jarek had expected. They were broken, tired, and weak. The Zaldrak survivors had been living in hiding for years, scavenging what little they could to survive. They had been left behind, forgotten by the very empire they had once served. Jarek stood in the doorway, watching them. These were not the fierce warriors he had known. They were survivors, nothing more. And in their eyes, Jarek saw something he had never expected: regret. They weren't proud of what they had done. They weren't warriors anymore. They were just people, trying to survive in a world that had moved on without them. For the first time in his life, Jarek felt no connection to his people. They were not the proud, powerful warriors he had once admired. They were broken, just like he had been. And in that moment, Jarek knew that he had truly left that life behind. The humans offered help, offered supplies, but the survivors were beyond saving. They were too far gone, too wrapped up in the past to move forward. And so, Jarek did what he had to do. He helped the humans, offer them a chance to rebuild, to find a new way to live, but he knew deep down that some things could never be fixed. As the mission came to an end, Jarek stood on the edge of the outpost, looking out at the desolate landscape. It was a reminder of what had been lost, but it was also a reminder of what he had gained. He had seen the truth of the Zaldrak Empire, and he had seen that there was no going back. His past was gone, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't undo what had been done. But he could move forward, and that was enough. As Jarek made his way back to the human ship, he felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He had faced it, and he had chosen to move forward. He had chosen to live. When he returned to the ship, Ava was waiting for him. She didn't say anything at first, just gave him a look that told him everything he needed to know. He had done it. He had faced his past and come out the other side. Jarek looked at her and smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I think I'm finally ready," he said quietly. Eva nodded, her eyes warm.